Man, there's been a lot going on in schools, mostly centered around books. And we're going to round up some of this, starting in South Carolina. So in February, as part of Black History Month, there was a high school teacher that wanted to use the word, the academic work, between the world and me in lessons having to do with systemic racism. And that is not allowed. That has now been stopped because some of the students were made to feel uncomfortable, or at least said that they felt uncomfortable as a result of it. So Mary Wood is the teacher, teaches advanced placement language arts at Chapin High School, wanted to guide students through participating in civil debate around things like systemic racism. So the lesson plan was part of preparing for advanced placement tests and involved watching 2 videos about systemic racism, reading Coates' memoir that we just talked about, and doing research with a variety of sources. Then students were meant to write essays on their understanding of the book and make an argument about whether they agreed with Coates that systemic racism is a problem in the US. You'll notice that the lesson was not to write an essay that you agree, it's whether you agree or not, to engage in a civic debate. Some students were not having it. They say that the lesson made them feel ashamed to be white, and they blocked the section on systemic racism from being taught entirely. So civic debate was ended. There will be no debate on that topic. It has been banned because the students felt uncomfortable, combined with a law that weaponized their supposed uncomfortableness to stop learning from happening. And so one student said, hearing Woods' opinion and watching these videos made me feel uncomfortable. I actually felt ashamed to be Caucasian. These videos portrayed an inaccurate description of life from past centuries that she is trying to resurface. So first of all, if you believe that it is an inaccurate description of life, you know where you could have expanded on that? In your essay, saying why you don't agree with the book. You could have cited other sources. You could have provided evidence. That did not have to happen because they were uncomfortable. And the law now elevates that uncomfortableness to having the force of law to shut down learning. Mondale, what do you think?
I think I'm confused. Like
I am.
I can reject homework because I'm uncomfortable. I didn't go to that school. Like that wasn't an option for me. Like everything about North Carolina history in 8th grade made me uncomfortable. And I wrote about it and I screamed about it. I didn't get to project, I didn't get to say, hey, I'm black. I don't want to learn about how great this state is because we had no police departments until y'all freed black people and rewrote the Constitution and made it mandatory that we have prisons throughout this state. I didn't get to talk about that and in a way that would ban everybody else's ability to learn North Carolina history the way they wanted to teach it. I'm absolutely disgusted at where we find ourselves. Again, the anti-woke mob forcing people to see and do. But I mean, this is a state that just got rid of the Confederate flag, right? This is a state where Nikki Haley, who's now a candidate for president, said that we should have a Confederate holiday month. Confederate month because we have a Black History Month. So this is par for the course. It's also one of the states that has one of the most amount of what were segregation schools still in effect right now. I'm super disgusted with this idea that students can be uncomfortable and change curricula for other students just because we're talking about what was true. And the idea that a student can tell a teacher what she can and can't teach because they're uncomfortable. About what happened in past centuries is absolutely ridiculous to me when I'm forced to read Shakespeare.
Yeah, it's just like being like the force of law being used to say, if you feel uncomfortable, not if you are plausibly made to feel uncomfortable. There doesn't have to be anything objective about it. The lesson doesn't have to be bad anyway. You just have to say that you are made to feel uncomfortable. Literally anything about race, anything about any of this. I feel uncomfortable as a white person. This shuts it down. And it doesn't have to be a majority. It can be 1 or 2 students. So we're citing quotes from the students. I have no idea how many it is. I imagine that the vast majority of students had no problem with it. One of the reasons I imagine that is because that lesson had been taught in previous years. It's perfectly fine. Nobody died as a result of it. And honestly, I would say if the students are telling the truth, if I assume that they're telling the truth, then I think rather than shutting down conversation, I think it's needed. Because why exactly would learning about decades-old systemic racism make you feel bad? If you do, there's probably something wrong and it should be looked into. I think academic conversations should be just the beginning of the conversations that come about it. Because when I read about slavery, I don't feel bad for myself. That would be weird. I feel bad for our country, I feel bad for our history, I feel bad that people actually did that, I feel bad that people still apologize for it. But I don't feel individually guilty. That's bizarre. The idea that you would just stop talking about it, that's a dereliction of duty, not just in an academic sense, but to the mental well-being and the continued health of that student who has something going on mentally. Any final thoughts, Mondale?
Yeah, I mean, listen, until we are honest about people, we spend a lot of time talking about the statues and monuments to the Confederate soldiers. We don't spend enough time which are in existence in this country only because the United Daughters of the Confederate. But we don't talk about what the United Daughters of Confederate did to our schools in southern states. They changed the entire books that were allowed. They banned certain books and they only allowed books in the schools for 2 or 3 generations, right? That taught that Southern history was a thing. And these kids now in school were raised by folk who learned this history. That the lost cause was a real thing, that these were heroes, and northern aggression is a real thing. So now what we see is this playing out again in a state where we talk about Ron DeSantis, but Ron DeSantis even it's not even this governor that's banned the most books. It's other states that's going under the radar for doing the same thing. And South Carolina is fast catching up, being one of those states burning the most books. And they're also a state already with some of the worst education markers in this country. So why are we dimming these students' lives even more by preventing them from being uncomfortable when we know that's where growth happens?
Yeah, and by the way, look, this is not a blanket thing. There are things that teachers could do or say that would plausibly make students uncomfortable, and the kids should be protected. But simply talking about historic facts that their conservative parents tell them are unacceptable to acknowledge, that's not enough. We have to use reason. That's true. There's some things that are out of bounds. And I know that because up until like the last year, what would you say Republican stance is on safe spaces for students? Were they pro or against it? Because they sure seem pro it here when it comes to shutting down conversations of race. I vaguely remember them having a problem with it up until recently.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.